This week we feature a professional intuitive, spiritual teacher and host of Conscious Talk for Conscious People YouTube channel and Life Magnetics podcast, where her and her guests dive into paranormal topics such as spirit communication, psychic abilities, UFOs, and many other interesting paranormal phenomena. I'd like to welcome Crystal Compton to the show. How you doing, Crystal?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on too. I appreciate, you taking the time to do this. Um, Really cool YouTube channel. I got to check out some of your stuff.
Thanks.
Maybe for the listeners, can you kind of just talk about, maybe where your interest in paranormal came from and
Mhm.
kind of touch on this intuitive thing that I'm hearing about?
Sure. I think that I've just lived a very evidential life, like my whole life. I've always had spiritual evidences, things like seeing spirits or seeing auras or seeing or knowing things ever since I was a kid. I was born and raised in Hawaii. My father was born and raised in Hawaii, and Hawaii is just a very magical place generally. And so I think my first memory was not of my mom or dad. It was just of these two tree people that used to sit on a branch outside of my bedroom. And I was probably 3 or 4, very young. And I would have these long conversations with them. And of course, I didn't have a vocabulary because I was a little child, but it was all telepathic. And it was also very normal. Like it was just something that I was able to do. And luckily for me, my parents weren't dogmatic. My father was into Hawaiiana and like the Hawaiian gods. My mom was very psychic herself. And so when I went to them and I talked about some of the things that I was experiencing, they were able to give me a framework and kind of give me permission to not necessarily be afraid, but to embrace it and to navigate it. So I was very lucky for that. But at the same time, my childhood was really, really abusive. My father was just he was a free radical on the planet. Like he was just a substance abuser. He had grown up with his own trauma. And so the only reason I mention that is because I think trauma, especially when you're living with an abuser or like somebody like a narcissist, actually helps you to get more in tune as well. Like I would know before my father was even headed home what kind of night it was going to be,
Right.
what was going to happen. And so I was able to prepare myself a little bit, but I learned how to read him. I learned
Mhm.
how to read the vibrations of it all. And that just kind of helped me
Yeah.
to develop as an intuitive person. And when I was about 12 or 13, I tripped and fell into fundamentalist Christianity. My friend took me to church. She took me to a Pentecostal church. I don't know if you've ever been to one, but those people are crazy. They're
Yep.
like
Yep.
getting slain in the spirit. They're speaking in tongues. They're prophesying, which was really very psychic. So I fit in quite a bit in that church. And that kind of started my interest in spirituality and also religion. And so here I am today, many, many, many decades later.
I think it's interesting, you touched on um, being like, someone who's went through trauma or abuse at a young age, and it maybe heightening or increasing your sensitivity to different things. And I can totally see that. And just, coming from a psychological background, psychology background, I've heard that in many cases with, children. And it's perhaps just maybe a way to, I don't know, just like a way to survive, right? A way to
Yes.
maybe help protect yourself or to just to be more on edge or aware of your surroundings and just picking up on subtle cues from people that are like, perhaps the abuser or somebody that, you kind of, worry about. That's interesting. Now, these tree people,
Yeah.
is that something that's like a Hawaiian tradition, or is that just something you were seeing? What are the tree people? Talk to us.
Well, I mean, at the time, I really didn't know. I just thought that they looked funny because they were half human and half what I would say now fawn. Like they had weird little legs. And they were not warm and fuzzy at all. They were actually very, the feeling of them was just like I had to tread lightly a little bit, especially the male. There was a male and a female. And now I know that they are part of the elemental kingdom. You know, you could call them a nature spirit. You could call them a kind of, I don't know, would it be a gnome? Would it be, I don't know what kind of elemental exactly,
Like
but
a kind of like a fairy on them lines,
kind of
or
like a fairy. Yeah, but you know, in Hawaii, we have kind of a different model for some of that. Like we have
mm-hmm,
what's called a menehune, which I
mm,
think can probably be likened to a leprechaun. You know,
mm-hmm.
leprechauns too aren't all about pots of gold. They will rock your dome, is what I'm saying. And so like in Hawaii, we have warrior class of spirits. And so they felt a lot like that. And I have also experienced fairy energy, you know, in Chicago. I've experienced it in Denver. Here I am in Texas. They're always around. It's just whether you're kind of tuned to be able to pick up on their presence and interact with them.
That's interesting, and that's what I was going to ask you. Is that something you still see or pick up on? I mean, I'm assuming as a child you were perhaps more open and things maybe were a lot clearer than they are now. I could be wrong. I'm just saying, based on other people that I've heard talk about this kind of thing. Um, Let us know what's the deal.
Yes, I can still communicate with them now, and but I don't spend a lot of time doing it just because my interests, like what you focus on, tends to be what activates in your life, and I really don't focus on dead people. I really don't focus on tree spirits. I could, and it would activate, but um, I- yeah, I just feel like they are always there. And the thing about nature elementals is that they don't always like people because they're there to protect the planet. And so if you believe in Gaia or Gaia consciousness and the earth, and the spirit of the earth, which is a higher consciousness, in my opinion. They're kind of the class of being that's there to organize it and there to defend it. And so, humans, of course, on the planet at this time, we're not doing everything right. We're destroying things, we're polluting things. And so, they're not always happy to meet you. But if they know that you are a spirit or a soul who is willing to partner with them, then they try to make your acquaintance. First, they get a read on you, in my opinion, and say, "Oh, Crystal and Compton, she's on the same wavelength, or we share kind of a vibration. Let me make an overture." Now, when a fairy makes an overture, it's usually very mischievous. It's usually like you put your keys there every single day, but on this day, they're not there, they're in your bedroom. How did that happen? And then 3 days later, something else goes missing. And they're just kind of letting you know, hey, we're here. We're here behind the scenes. And it's up to you at that point to say, well, I acknowledge that. I noticed that. And I want to engage in that. So tell me who you are. And if you do that, and if you invite them, you'll have some kind of an experience.
That's fascinating. And so that raises a couple questions. I didn't realize the conversation was going to go this way, but this is cool.
Mhm.
So these you talk about them being perhaps protectors of nature, protectors of
Mhm.
the earth, Gaia. Uh, how so? How do they? How? What kind of things do they do to help protect?
Well, they will they organize nature. So this is kind of a big topic, but for example, every tree, like my big oak outside in the front of my house, has an overlighting deva, or an overlighting fairy presence that organizes the tree and the root system and the leaves and the branch. And so they organize nature just generally, but in order to defend, they will often try to thwart, get in the way of, bring nature forward to stop something that's happening against nature. In your house and even in your home, you have an overlighting energy. Because this is also part of nature, even though it's man-made, because we're part of nature. They're also present in your home, and so if things are starting to go amiss in your home, especially if you have engaged them, they will step forward sometime to thwart somebody, to thwart a process that is happening. And if you work with them closely, you know when they're there and you know when they're doing that. And I can also hear, I'm clairaudient, so I can hear them. They sound very different than, say, an angel or a dead person. They have a very like high pitched, tinkly kind of sound, a weird vibratory type of sound. So I can tell when they're around and doing things.
That's fascinating. And I liked how you mentioned uh Earth has a conscious. I've given this a thought. I've heard, obviously I've heard people talk about this before, and I've given it thought, and I've I kind of feel that way. Especially um I've dabbled in, like magic mushrooms and things like that. And when I'm on those, like you get like
Mhm.
an amazing sense with nature, because I go out in nature when I'm with the on those, and it just, I don't know, there's just something magical about the planet. And can you maybe touch on that? Does Earth have its own consciousness?
Yes, I believe that it does. I believe all of energy is all of creation is always moving, and it's moving towards something. And I would say that that is an intelligent movement. Like we're all kind of going in a direction, including Earth. Now, I'm also a channel, which means that I create a space and a place in myself to bring forth divine energy and information. And so part of my channeling many years ago, I asked about the Earth and what my divine sources said was that the Earth's energy, the vibration of the Earth, is actually akin to or the same as an archangel. So very, very, very high vibration. And in my way of organization, there's nothing higher than an archangel except for God. There's nothing higher. So there's planetary consciousnesses to all of it, to every planet in our solar system. But some would say, and I think I believe this, but I'm pretty fluid about how I believe. Some would say that there is a crystalline grid within the earth. And this crystalline grid is intelligent. And this crystalline grid is fueling and supporting the consciousness of the planet. I think there's a reason that the old people called this a mother nature. And there's a reason that there's that nurturing kind of an energy that we ascribe to the planet. And I think if you're attuned to nature, for example, if you do something like plant medicine, magic mushrooms, which I have done as well, we could have long discussions about that. But I think if you're attuned to it, and I think if you are trying to connect with it, it's probably the biggest demonstration of source energy possible. Like you can just go sit on a mountain in a beautiful breeze and contemplate life, and you can have a shift in your consciousness. That's the power of nature, and that's how you know that it's very high vibration.
Yeah, that's something I've talked about on my show, and I think more people need to do that. It's just going out in nature itself is medicine in a lot of
Mhm.
ways. It can be humbling. It can, lift any, I guess, anxieties for the day or anything you got going on, any kind of problems. It can even help you to find solutions and clear your head to think. I just think that so many people have gotten away from that, with this technology age and everything of,
Mhm.
of just going out in nature and just getting lost, shutting the
Mhm.
phone off for a while and just going on a walk. It's healing. It's very
Yes, it
healing.
is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent. So what is spirit to you then? You talk about, what is spirit?
Oh, Lord. Okay. Well, hmm. I think spirit is the animating property within a human. Um, so not necessarily my physicality, not necessarily my brain, which animate like that all is true too, but the spirit is what animates the life. Small spirit. I think a spirit inside of me exists that is always tethered to the great spirit, which we could call God, or we could call the all that we could call that Harry. I don't think God cares if you call him Harry or Susie, but we're always connected to that. You know, I come from Christianity, and that's still a big part of my paradigm. I've discarded a lot of the things in the Bible, but some of them are eternal. And one thing Jesus said was that the kingdom of heaven is inside of you. And I think that is a reference to the magical divine nature of human beings. So that's my spirit, which is different than a soul, probably. My spirit is what's moving in me. And the big spirit, that would be God. And God is always moving, and God is always creating. And I will go off if you let me. So I'm just going to stop right there. Did that
I
even
mean,
answer your question? It's
yeah,
hard to answer
yeah,
that question.
it is.
Yeah.
It is hard to answer, and I just wanted to kind of get your take on it. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that the kingdom of God or perhaps
Hmm.
heaven or however you want to word it is inside you,
Hmm.
and I think again, I hate to keep going back to this. I don't want to turn this into a psychedelic episode, but again, magic mushrooms on them. I think you kind of really get a deep sense and meaning of what you've just spoken. At least from my perspective and in my experience. I'm not so sure everybody's had that, but I kind of get I kind of get what Jesus is saying in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
It's interesting. Um, your thoughts on perhaps haunted locations and how I don't know. I got this question. It bothers me.
Okay.
The whole residual thing at locations, and
Hmm.
this kind of like tape recording playing over and
Hmm.
over of maybe perhaps something walking through. And I'm like, I think to myself, what the hell is that? Is that just something that's been maybe perhaps recorded somehow with the
Hmm.
minerals and the rocks in the earth, or is that something that, is it like a strange thing that we're like seeing history like bleeding through? It's happening, say
Hmm.
years ago, but
Hmm.
you're witnessing it right now. It's kind of like fading into our current existence. What's your take on it? Have you ever given that any kind of thought?
That's interesting. I've never thought of it that way, that we're actually glimpsing into a different timeline. And timelines are, of course, I think, infinite. And so you're just perpetually glimpsing into a similar timeline where this is happening. I mean, I think all things are possible. My personal opinion and in my experience, what you are seeing is a recording. So when you see the woman walk down the hall every night at, 10 p.m. and she turns the corner into the room, that is a recording of something that took place. That is a recording that happened because there was some sort of an emotional, spiritual, soul trauma that happened in or around that period of time. There is no spirit there. I don't think so. Well, I mean, we could get cosmic about that. There, for the most part, is no spirit there. Now, that recording might be attached to still a soul that is passed on, or a soul that is actually in the fourth dimension, which is not heaven, so they're still around. But for the most part, like when you see the Civil War soldiers take the same path every single day at twilight, that is just a recording of an event that you happen to be seeing. In my experience, nobody really knows, of course.
Yeah, and I've always, I guess, initially I've always thought that what you had just mentioned, but I often wonder because a lot of people say that there is no time, there's no space, that everything's
Right.
happening all instantaneously. So it makes me wonder, are we seeing something that's perhaps happening instantly in the same place, but just in a, like you said, a different timeline? Just fascinating. I just wanted to kick that idea at you, because again, I think I mentioned off air, I think you're a deep thinker. You've kind of, how long have you been doing this for? How long have you been diving in these pretty much your whole life, right?
Right. I mean, I've lived evidentially like in the paranormal forever. And then I became a Christian, and then I had to kind of put some of that away, but I was still very psychic, even in the structure of Christianity. When I left Christianity, which was a decision that I made, um, intentionally. Like I just didn't stop going. I just left for a reason. I kind of wandered around for a while. And at some point, I decided, like, I want to get back to the little girl sitting in the bedroom talking to tree spirits. Like, what was that? And how come it's not happening as much anymore? And is there a way to actually turn it back on? And so from that point on, I started to read. And the first author I started to read was Edgar Casey. And I liked Casey because he too was a fundamentalist Christian. I think he was a Baptist. That man, that boy read his Bible, he memorized it. He was also a healer, he was also clairvoyant, and I would say a channel, potentially a medium. But that was kind of the doorway, by looking at someone else who was Christian but alternative, for me to start exploring all of these other things. And once you point your interest at something, and if you have an intention to match it, as I said earlier, it starts to activate and little things start to happen. And in my experience, spirit is very quiet in the beginning. It's very quiet. It happens on the periphery of your life. Like you'll see something out of the side of your eye, or maybe you see a flash of light with your naked vision in a room, or you think you hear something as you're falling to sleep. And that's always to me an invitation. Like, are you curious about that? Do you want to know more about that? And if we actually address it and say, yeah, I want to know more about that. I would like more of these evidences. I want to know who's giving them. I believe ask and it shall be given. If your intention is there and your interest is on it and you ask, well, then it'll start to grow. So that's just what happened to me. I became interested in it. I didn't believe everything I read, by the way. A lot of it is super kooky and doesn't apply to my life. But there's so much out there that I think people don't allow themselves to consider. And to just, there's a scripture in the Bible. I'm sorry, this is just me though, but there's a scripture in
You're
the
okay.
Bible where God says, come, let us reason together. And when I left the church, I never forgot that scripture, because what it implied to me was, come, it's okay to use your brain. not the brain of your pastor, not the thinking of your church. It's just God in you figuring it out for you. And so that's what I employed in my spiritual journey. And through that, I started turning on all the lights in the house. Clairvoyance is a light, and mediumship is a light, and empathy is a light, through my study and also through the modification of vibration, which is another subject entirely.
That's another good point. I think that's interesting that I don't know how I want to word this. So I like how you keep using the Christian, your
Mm-hmm.
Christian background and
Mm-hmm.
upbringing and kind of, to kind of tell the story. I like that. I mean, I come from a Christian background as well. I don't consider myself a Christian,
Right.
but I do think a lot of scripture and things in the Bible are very divine or like God like understanding. Like it was written by, I feel like, something that was greater than man in a lot of ways. I feel like it was God inspired. Let's put it that way. I just
Right.
My whole thing is just the whole dogma, like
Sure.
just you're gonna kind of do what you're told, and I, I I can't get into the like organized religion, I guess.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
Well, but let me kind of blow your mind, and just point out that, and I just had this argument yesterday on this podcast, which was so ridiculous. It's called The Fallen State. And I'm probably going to come out next week. And it was just the most ridiculous podcast with both a pastor who was challenging me a lot on these Christian issues. But what I told him and what I'll tell you is that Jesus was psychic. Jesus was a medium. When he's out on the mountain during the transfiguration, he's talking to Moses and Elijah. They're dead. When he's calling Lazarus forth from the tomb, Lazarus is dead. So he's having a mediumship experience. Jesus was also a clairvoyant. He told of the destruction of the temple many years before it happened. He was an energy healer. He was casting out demons and throwing them into swine. He was a physical healer. So much of what exists in the paranormal and new age community is directly related to the things that Jesus did. And Jesus himself said, anything I can do, you can do. He said, greater things than I have done will you do. And so I find it very dogmatic and very limiting when people are only stuck in the literal word of the Bible, because God is new every morning. And that's a really fantastic and wondrous and curious way to live your life, just expecting something new. I get to learn today. I get to play today. It doesn't always feel good, but it's a new experience meant to edify me. So I totally agree with you. And that is why I intentionally left Christianity, because the principles, some of them, not all of them, the principles, the red words, the words that Jesus spoke, I resonate with that, and I still do all of these years later. But the rest of it, that's just human. It's human garbage. I think there's a lot of great Christians. My brother, for example, he's a great, like the kind of Christian you want to meet on the street. But so much of it is political. So much of it is poisonous. Most of it is greed, and I just don't get how you have these pastors in their Gucci suits talking about, give me your money in this tithe. And
Right.
at the same time, Jesus said, it is harder for a rich man to get to heaven than a camel to get through the eye of a needle. Did
Right.
you not read that part? We should read that part.
Yeah, and I don't really want to knock anybody who is into
Sure.
organized religion.
Yes.
I mean, if that's what it takes to help make you a better person,
Yes.
I'm all for, whatever it is to, better humanity, better yourself as a human.
Yes.
That's great. It's just again, it's not for me. And what you're saying makes a lot of sense. On that note, then I know you've in some of your episodes you've touched on UFOs and aliens.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that as far as it's concerned with Christianity and God? And I mean, where does aliens fit into this?
Well, I'd have to have a think about how I think it relates back to God. I do believe in interdimensional beings. I've been visited by them. I do believe in, I do think that we are being visited. I think we have been for a very long time. We were probably seeded as a planet by greater intelligences. I think 75 to 80% of what you're listening to about UFOs, that's all mythology and lore. I think a lot of it is fear porn when you're talking about implants and you're talking about experimentation. I think that when you're afraid, generally speaking, you open yourself up to strange experiences in the world of spirit, which is why I talk predominantly in the work that I do about something called dominion, which is a state of fearlessness. But the point is, I think something's happening. I think that it's related to the dumb stuff we're doing as humans. I think that it's documented that I think the nuclear system started to activate in the 80s, and I forget where it was happening, and then it all shut down. And they don't know why, but there were UFOs that were seen in the area. I think you see UFO
Yeah.
craft around nuclear
I think it was in
plants.
Russia, is what
Was it
where
in
you
Russia?
talk. Yeah, I think it was in Russia. I think it happened. Actually, I think it happened in the States too, as well.
It
But
did, I think
yeah,
too.
yeah,
But it is not. It's not an isolated incident.
no,
I think that there's a reason they're watching us to see what comes next, and there's so much that I think is coming next. But I just don't believe all of it, and I just think that there's such a racket. You get your. I'm just gonna call out Corey Good, for example. I don't know if you know, he's the Blue Avian guy, and it's such a racket. Now he's saying he's the man Enoch. He's, there's just too many people with egos in all of these different
yeah.
areas, and spirituality is not exempt from that. And so you really have to use your inner operating system to try and determine what is true and what is false. And at the end of the day, that's going to land with you. So,
I buy into what you're saying, and I buy into them potentially being interdimensional, or perhaps even like just way more spiritually sophisticated than we are, and not even. I think I don't know. I mean, I guess they could be like more like nuts and bolts, like kind of materialistic like we are, but I'm not so sure that they are. And there's like this really weird paranormal aspect, and like a lot of these I've heard a lot of people talk about this, how like a lot of these abduction cases, or just these where you have these encounters with these UFOs, there's like some really weird strange stuff that doesn't make any sense always in these stories, like
mhm.
almost as if it's, I don't know, it's just very odd. It's almost as if it's not real. But
Well,
then there is
okay.
the thing that you talk about, how like you mentioned seated, and I often wonder that
Mhm,
as well, because I
mhm,
think there's, I don't know how true it is. Again, like you said, there's so many people that just kind of like fear porn, and but
mhm,
there's people that at least mention that they think that our DNA has been manipulated, and that
mhm.
there's no way through evolution that we evolved in that way in the amount of time that the universe has even been around, much less
Right.
the earth.
Right. Well, you mentioned that there's something odd about these abduction stories. And I would offer that I think most of them are happening in the astral. They're happening while you are out of your body, but you are also somewhat conscious. And the astral plane is very chaotic. It is the domain, it's the fourth dimension. It is the domain of the dreamer. It is the domain of the recently deceased. It is also, in my experience, a portal dimension. And what I mean by that is it is a place that is accessed. Like we go through the portal, which we call the light, when we die to get to the fifth dimension. But that portal is used by all kinds of other different beings from other dimensions. And so it's a chaotic kind of place. And so sometimes people are having these abduction experiences. And I do think there's entities that are conducting certain things in your astral body, but it's such a distorted kind of a realm that it's hard to really pin it down, and it's not necessarily repeatable. Like Whitley Strieber, like he wrote the book Communion. I have a lot of respect for Strieber, but I have to say I think a good deal of what he's talking about is something that's happening in the imaginal mind, or it's happening while he's in sleep paralysis, or it's happening while he's in the astral. Doesn't make it not valid. There's still something that's happening there, but what does that imply, right? Does that imply there's aliens? I don't know. Does that imply there are archons in the fourth dimension, these reptilians who are just trying to puppet us? Maybe, but I don't know. I do know that I don't get messed with, though. I used to get messed with. Like when I left Christianity and I was wandering around in deserts trying to figure out, okay, who is God? And I was starting to get into psychic stuff because I was always interested in it. I started having spiritual attacks, shadow people. I've had many shadow people encounters, spirits, feelings like feeling of massive anxiety, paranoia, OCD type symptoms. Like I was under spiritual attack, which kept me in kind of a state of fear, which then caused me to magnetize more of those to myself. It wasn't until I figured out, oh, no, 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 no. The power exists inside of me. The power exists inside of me. And when I'm running the energy of my own I am, my own divine self, Jesus said, you are all gods. Small g, but gods. You are divine. When we run the energy of that, believe me when I tell you, the whole world of spirit, all the ghosts, all the thought forms, all the everything, recognize that energy in you and tend to steer clear. Or if they try it, like if they roll up in your house one night and try to harass you for whatever reason, as soon as you get back into the space of that, they leave. That has been for me the most empowering thing, is dominion. And I think the reason people have such frightening experiences, or that they're afraid to kind of look into it, is because they're afraid of what could happen, which is spiritual attack. And it's real, but it stops happening once you figure out who you are in the grand scheme of things.
And does it perhaps also stop happening because, I mean, some of these entities perhaps absorb that energy, that fear that you're putting out? I mean, does that empower them in a way? And if you don't have that fear or that, I don't know. I'm
Yeah, no,
just
no, no. That's a fascinating topic, because what you're talking about is when you're in a state of fear and you're just running fear like it's your job, that energy goes somewhere. It doesn't just stay in you. It's externalizing. And this is how you create thought forms or tulpas. And so if you live in a house, for example, my house when I was growing up with my crazy dad, who was a substance abuser, and an abuser. He was just constantly in a state of rage. He was constantly in a state of anxiety, and he was feeding that energy. And what happens when you continue to create that kind of energy is you start to create an entity. That is what a tulpa is. Now, if you can catch yourself, maybe you've spent 2 weeks in depression and now stuff is starting to be weird in your life. And maybe even in your house, you're hearing knocks or you're hearing voices. Okay. If you can catch yourself and get back into a state of oneness or a state of dominion, then you can uncreate a tulpa. But if you stay in the state of fear or anger, or if you live with someone who's just constantly expressing that, those entities will begin to become intelligent, and they can continue to develop to the point of autonomy, meaning they don't need just you, they don't need their host. They can bop on over to your neighbor's house and they can feed over there. This is what poltergeist activity is, which I'm sure you know, that it's not a spirit that's finding its way into the house. It is somebody in the house that is creating the activity, which can become very intelligent and manifest in the form of apparitions and other evidences. Until you figure out, no, that's you though, that's coming from you, you're just going to continue to perpetuate it.
Let me ask you a question then. You had mentioned shadow people.
Yeah.
Is that perhaps what that is? Because I've had an experience with a shadow person that was like a hat man, I've mentioned on my show
Mm-hmm.
before.
Mm-hmm.
But I've heard a lot of people like psychic mediums and stuff say that when they talk about shadow people, oftentimes they mention how they never were human. A
Right.
lot of them. I don't know if all of them, maybe some of them were, and just try to maybe forecast themselves to manifest themselves as a shadow person. But I'm just in general,
Mm-hmm.
what's your take on shadow people?
Yeah. So because I've had encounters with them, and I've also had encounters with angels, and I've also had encounters with aliens, I'm able to check out their signature. And I've come to the conclusion, this is a personal opinion in the realm of conjecture, but in my opinion, I don't even think they're from our universe. I think that they are outside of our universe. I do think they're alien. I think their signature, how you feel them to be, feels like just terror. It feels like such fear. Even if they're just in the corner of your bedroom, if you once you connect with them energetically, it's just this overwhelming panic and fear. I don't know so much whether that's our response to them or us just picking up on what their energy feels like. Nonetheless, I don't think they're doing anything good on our planet. I don't think they're doing anything good on our planet. In the beginning of my spiritual wanderings, I was in sleep paralysis. I felt, the old hag on my chest. I saw, there was an entity right in top of me, just looking down on me, so close that I could just see one eye. Um, I would be bum rushed. If I'm in a lucid dream, I'd be bum rushed by shadow people. And once I got into my own personal power and spiritual power, dominion, once I started to know how that feels and to run it, then I would have encounters, but I'd be able to get out of them right away. The most recent one was probably 3 years ago in this house which belongs to well, we own it, but it used to be my husband's grandpa's house. And I went lucid in a dream, which is always so fun because then you get to play in the astral. And I'm walking around the house, and at the end of this hall, right here, right by my office, I see his grandfather. And so I approach the grandfather to have a conversation, again, fully lucid. And then the closer I get, the grandfather starts to transform into a shadow being, and then just, they like to rush at me, like very quickly, just rush me. It took me maybe 10 seconds to say, no, we're not doing that. Get out. And whereas it would take me maybe an hour in the past to get into out of a state of fear and into a state of power, nowadays it's just like, no, 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 we're not going to do that, because I'm so used to it happening, and now it hardly happens at all.
That's fascinating. So I'm gonna take it back a little bit to the
Sure.
aliens. I just got one more question on that, and we can
Yeah.
move on. What is your take on aliens then? I mean, I'm assuming you don't quite really know, but I mean, what is if they are, I guess, just spiritual beings like us in a material world? I mean, what is why does it seem like there's so much interest in us?
I think that some of the aliens that people are encountering are parasites. And I wouldn't be surprised if they were harvesting our emotions and putting us into states of fear and panic while we're out of body in order to harvest that, not unlike shadow people do. I think there might be some aliens who are here to collaborate technologically, and maybe they're doing that with governments, and maybe there's some kind of a contract where we get to abduct this population of people in exchange for you'll get this bit of technology. That may be happening. I think it's way more common that the kind of aliens that a lot of spiritual people encounter are more interdimensional than, say, a gray, your idea of a gray. Like, for
Right.
example, higher vibration. And you said, that aliens maybe are more spiritually advanced. And I would say many of them are not. They're technologically advanced. And maybe they have technology in the realm of energy, but many, to include the grays, are not spiritually advanced. In fact, the opposite. But there are lots and lots and lots of other types of beings that are spiritually advanced. For example, the Arcturians, who Edgar Casey, I'm sorry, I have a big library right there. Edgar Casey referred to Arcturus as the most advanced technology in our galaxy, a species or civilization in our galaxy. And I find that beings like the Arcturians, who, I'm going to sound so crazy, and I know it, but I'm just going to tell you what I think. Arcturians dwell in a different dimension, and I believe it's the sixth dimension. And I think they're involved in spiritual technology and helping us to shift our consciousness now more than ever, especially with the emergence of AI and the way things are going. I think you've got these interdimensional beings that are ascended. That doesn't mean they're God or angels, but they're ascended in this way, that are trying to help us. In the sixth dimension, that is the dimension of sacred geometry. It is the dimension of templatry. Nothing exists in the third dimension, our dimension, unless it's created there first. And we pull it down into this dimension. So I think you've got all these beings who are trying to create this spiritual technology to give it to us at this time. And that's why they want so many of us to wake up. And that's why I think people have visitations from some aliens who are just doing that kind of work. Do I sound crazy to you?
No,
Dylan?
it's interesting. It's very interesting. It just brought a thought to mind though.
Mhm.
So like a lot of this talk seems very obviously very spiritual, but more on the lines of like kind of on the, and I could be wrong on this, maybe I'm just, but kind of on the lines of like more like a like reincarnation, and we're
Mhm.
here for a purpose, and then we move on and we try to elevate our consciousness to get to a higher plane or something like that. How does that fall with Christianity for you? Because I've actually heard some Christians, not the ones that are part of the church, but mention how Jesus even talked about reincarnation and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I think doctrinally it's not widely accepted. And I know what passage you're speaking about. I think the disciples come to him. There's a disabled man, and they said, why is he disabled? Is it because of something he's done in this life or one before? And Jesus didn't take the opportunity to say, well, reincarnation, that's blasphemy. He instead answered them and went along with the conversation, which is an implication that maybe reincarnation is something that Jesus knew about or believed, but we can't really say. Um, I believe in reincarnation. I don't ever want to come back here, though. And I think that, have you heard about the Lords of Karma and the reincarnation soul trap?
I'm somewhat familiar with karma. No, but enlighten me on the Lords of Karma and
Oh,
the Soul
God.
Trap.
So I'm presently in my state of development trying to determine whether there's any truth to this, but it's the Lords of Karma, and I believe it's spoken about in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It is basically what the Gnostics would call archons, which are these entities that exist in the fourth dimension that are parasitical. And at the time that you die, and I'm not saying I believe this, I'm just thinking about it, but at the time that you die, they want you to go into the light because that is you engaging the reincarnation process. I think it's the Tibetan Book of the Dead says, don't go into the light, go in the opposite direction, go into the void, go into the darkness. And so some people believe, and there's writing out there, and there's super interesting conversations like with David Icke about this. Some people believe that when you die, most people are just trapped into
The
an
man.
endless cycle of reincarnation. David Icke?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
I like
man.
him a lot.
Yeah, me
Yeah,
too.
I like him a lot. I mean, I'll get
Go
sidetracked,
ahead.
but
I'm sorry.
no,
I'm
no,
sorry. I
no,
didn't
no,
mean to.
that's okay. I like him too. I think he's so very interesting. But the idea is that you just get caught in this perpetual cycle of reincarnation. And some of us want to come back. Maybe we're real curious about what it would be like to be um, commingled with the AI, but I don't want to come back. So I don't really want to reincarnate. I don't think reincarnation is compulsory, meaning I don't think as a soul you can tell me what to do. I think free will is the law. I think the only thing that's compulsory is from source energy.
I,
But I don't know for sure,
yeah,
obviously.
obviously we don't know for sure, but I can buy into having free will, and I'm with you on not wanting to come back in the future, because like where we're headed, I'm not, I'm
Right.
not cool with, I'm not down with. But I wonder, perhaps, can you, reincarnate into a different timeline, or
Hmm.
in the past versus, just 100 years from now or something like that.
Yeah, such a great question. I think why wouldn't we be able to reincarnate back into the Viking Age? I don't know anybody who'd want to do that. They did not play, but or you could
Right.
reincarnate back into the time of Christ. I think I keep trying to reincarnate back to the time of Kim Kardashian's birth so I can just be her, but that never works. I miss it by like 10 years. But I think you can try to reincarnate back into timelines, but the problem with the archons is that they don't necessarily put you where you want to go or do what you want to do
That's
if
what
they're
I've
real.
heard, because,
Hmm.
well, I've heard that, yeah, you may have some free will into like what you want to do, but there's like things that you kind of like a school you need to have to, I don't know, want to say graduate. I'm trying to look for to evolve
Hmm.
to become a I don't know, a more,
Refined, like a more
yeah.
enlightened, right?
So there's things that you maybe have to have, experiences you have to go through, and things you still need to learn, that you need to work on. And
Can I do it on a different planet though? Like, does it have to
yeah,
be Earth?
yeah.
I'm tired of Earth.
But it
Yeah.
makes you wonder how much of it really would be choice versus, well, this is kind of the program you need to follow. I don't know. I wonder if it's, if it's all 100% free will, or if,
Yeah. You know what? That's the thing. And that's the thing. And they say the archons, when you die, they come to you as your deceased loved ones. Oh, I see grandma. Grandma's here to take me home. Is she? And so, what I trust is that if I can get very present upon death, like into my soul, into my spirit, I'll be able to read the energy because Jesus said, you will know them by their fruit. Like you can tell, if you check the energy, you can always tell whether something's of the light proximate to God or not proximate to God. And I'll make my decisions around that. I personally believe that I have free will. I personally believe that I am self-determining and I am the consciousness that's having this experience. Therefore, I'm the consciousness that's in control of it. That doesn't mean I'm God, but
Right.
that's how I believe. And that belief has helped me to manifest so many different outcomes for myself, knowing that I'm the player. I'm not Mario, I'm
Right.
playing the game. And this is my landscape. In fact, I
I love
created
that.
it. Yeah, I
I love
created
that.
this landscape. I believe when God said, "Let us make man in our image," he was talking about me. I was there when we were making man in our image. That's my higher self.
Right.
And we all collaborated to create the architecture of the universe, the dimensions. So I had a hand, I believe, in creating all of this. So intrinsically and innately, I know how to navigate these
Mm.
dimensions and this world. So that puts me in a more powerful position where I don't have to be in fear all the time. Because what do I have to fear if I created it?
Right. And I mean, really, I look at it kind of that way too, is when you, especially when you're talking about fear, I feel like until you lose the fear of perhaps dying or you overcome
Hmm.
that, you really don't really get to live life fully. It's
Hmm.
strange how that works, but I think just the simple belief of reincarnation really helps me to get over that. Um, the interesting thing though is, and I've thought this, and I just kind of want to drop something at
Sure.
you. You know, you talked about how you don't necessarily want to reincarnate, at least on this planet. And I thought I've had very similar thoughts. That's why, but I've also thought, but if we do have a higher self, a higher consciousness that's maybe experienced hundreds of lifetimes, how I'm looking at it is not from my higher self. I'm looking at it as Dylan Thomas, the guy who's just, you know, spent 42 years on this planet and kind of learned things. So I'm just wondering if once you go back into spirit form, if you actually have a different perspective on
Hmm.
reincarnation than you do as Crystal or as Dylan.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there's a reason I kept coming back here. I feel exhausted of the process, but maybe it's just this particular timeline is incredibly exhausting and chaotic. And there's so much at play right now, good and evil. There's so many different things happening in our society right now, good and evil, that I'm just tired. I do think, for example, my mother, before she died in 2012, she said, I am not done, all the contracts done. I am not coming back. But I still feel like she has potentially a, a part of her, an aspect of her has decided to come back. So I do think there might be a reason I'm unaware of in my little Crystal Compton body that might compel me to come back. No, I hope not, but I do think so. I think you're right.
But I get it. I get it. I totally get it. But I still feel like there still can we can still find beauty in life, right? And on this
Absolutely,
planet. Like
absolutely.
no matter the struggles or what kind of crazy ideas the media is
Mm-hmm.
pushing or
Mm-hmm.
weird stuff that's going on, there's
Mm-hmm.
still we can still find beauty. And I think there's something beautiful about being here and helping others to like
Yes,
raise their awareness on spirituality or something like that.
absolutely. And I don't mean to sound negative. I just I'm older than you. Like I've been around this block. I just feel like I would love at least a break. Like can we just do 400 years in advance? Like if we could just get out of this part, I would be happy about it. But absolutely. And the thing is, when you start becoming the creator of your experience, life is incredibly beautiful. Oh, and it is so magical. And you have the inner resources to contextualize the bad things that happen, and you can use that as a lesson. So and nature is beautiful. I think we have locked ourselves into such boxes with social media, with television, with our insular lives, and then the lockdown, and now we're just all in our
It's
houses.
all
Like
the
we just,
devil.
correct.
I'm just saying.
You are right. It's evil. There's so much evil. And it makes it hard for somebody like me because everything I do is like online. And I'm like, oh, but I gotta log on first. And it's just so gross. But what I'm saying is I think that taking walks in nature, that is the key. And doing what you can in your life to connect to whatever makes you happy. Joseph Campbell said, follow your bliss because it takes you on the sacred path that you came here to experience. But if all you're doing is reacting to what, they're mutilating kids again, all you're doing is reacting to the new political bullshit, then you are not in the space of intention of who it is that you are. And that's when you're most powerful. Don't get me preaching. I don't want to do that. But it's true, right?
It,
And more people have to talk about it.
yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I,
I know.
so well said. Thank you. Wow, fascinating conversation. Um, I guess, we're kind of running short on time. So maybe can
Really?
you
Okay.
tell
Mm-hmm.
the listeners about, your YouTube channel, kind of what
Mm-hmm.
they can expect if they check you out, your podcast? Is that one and the same? Are they separate? Kind of just talk about, maybe some of the guests you talk about, the topics, things that you do,
Sure.
things that you're doing.
Yeah, so I got on YouTube like in 2000. Well, I've been on YouTube actually from way back in the day, but we don't talk about those accounts. But I got onto YouTube as a spiritual person probably around 2010. And I just started putting out content on the things that I loved to talk about. And over time, I grew a following. I'm being very heavily throttled on YouTube right now. I have 44,000 people who follow me, and then maybe 300 people watch a video at this point. So I don't know what YouTube is doing. It is the devil. But from time to time, I post on YouTube. Like that's my community. That's how I found all my people was on YouTube. So I just make all kinds of different content, talking about all kinds of different things, including my life. I have 2 podcasts right now, but I'm about to have 3. Can never have too many podcasts. So my first one is Life Magnetics, and I like to talk about masterful works. For example, the Kabbalion, for right here, or Neville Goddard's Feeling is the Secret. This man right here changed my life. So I talk about masterful works. I talk with people who are in the spiritual field, maybe energy healers, psychics and things like that. My other podcast is called Spirit Pop, and we just talk trash about the Kardashians, but we try to bring some spirit into it. It's not always easy. And my new podcast is called Miraculous Thinking, where we are going to be going through the classics and talking about A Course in Miracles. And just, the Bible says, think on these things that are lovely. Just think on higher things. It'll transform your life. So my podcasts, all of them attempt to do that. But I also have online programs. I'm doing a program in October to help people it's like a rescue program because we're all so fried and overwhelmed right now. So it's just a program to help people meditate, get back to self, and have some circles where we can share. And you can go to my website, Crystal Ann Compton. Don't forget the E in Ann Compton, like straight outta.com, crystalanncompton.com. And anything I do, I will put right there. So I'm always
That,
doing
that
something,
that's
I
so
try to
awesome.
do, I try to do what I feel like doing. And if I don't feel like doing anything, I just don't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you definitely got a new follower here. I mean,
Oh, thank
because
you.
you're hitting a lot of home
Yeah.
runs with some of the stuff you're talking about. Just you're like right into my wheelhouse with stuff that
Yeah.
I'm into, and I really like your perspective on things. And I like the fact that you seem very well read. You mentioned a lot of different books and things where you're getting
Mhm.
your information from. I love that about you.
Thank
Uh,
you.
so couple more questions for you before I let you off the hook.
Sure.
What do you believe humans' purpose is then?
Um, I believe that my higher self dispatched Crystal Ann Compton into this incarnation to have experiences. And those experiences were meant to refine me. Refine me. Why? To refine me back to higher consciousness. And with every single life and iteration of me in these different lives that I'm having all over the universe in many dimensions, I am getting closer to God. The purpose of me being here is to live my purpose and to shine my light. I don't hide it under a bushel, and also to be of service to other people and to cultivate compassion and love and learn how to talk to people and try to enjoy the ride to the best of my ability.
It's well said.
Well, thank you.
Well said. So where do you believe we truly go after this? I mean, is
What,
it a little place like, in the clouds that we call heaven? Is it whatever we want to manifest? Is it any number of
yeah.
things?
I think when you die, you are going to find yourself in a dimensional space that is a mirror or a reflector of your inner state. So if you are Hitler, you're going to arrive in hell. And if you are, let me think of it. Mother Teresa wasn't so great. If you are Wayne Dyer, if you're Jesus Christ, you are going to find yourself in a higher realm. I think heaven is the fifth dimension. I think the portal of the fourth dimension will take you there. That's what I think is going to happen. I've had a near-death experience, so I've kind of had some experience in that. But
Oh, whoa,
I,
whoa, whoa, whoa. So you
oh
had a
yeah,
near-death experience.
yeah.
Can you let me elaborate a little bit? I mean,
Hmm.
that
Yeah, sure. I got really sick after I had my child, and lots happened, but I contracted sepsis, which is where every single organ is infected. I went into a coma for about a week, but before I did, on the night they did life-saving surgery, I had a near-death experience. I found myself walking down a train station, and as I was walking, I saw scenes from my life. Like I saw my ex-husband, just one of them. I have a few. I saw one ex-husband here with his family. I saw something else that had happened in my life over here, like archetypal imagery as I'm walking down the train station. I get to the train station and it's one of those turnstiles. And so I had the hospital bracelet on my wrist. So I tried to go through the turnstile and there was a figure on the other end that we could call the Grim Reaper. That's what it looked like. I don't know that it was. Very tall, probably 7 to 8 feet tall, wearing a hood, wearing a robe with is that called a scythe or a sickle? And he took it and he tapped my hospital band and he just said no. And his face was a clock. His face was a clock underneath his hood. He
that's
ta-
interesting.
he tapped it and he said no. And it was actually kind of nightmarish. It was actually pretty scary. And when I woke up, I have spent a long time wondering what that was all about. So I never like went to the light and oh, there's Jesus. Feels so good, like you hear so much of. Mine was more mythological and archetypal and strange.
Wow. Wow.
So I couldn't tell you what it means really. I just think it wasn't my time.
It
You know, I
wasn't your
still had,
time,
yeah.
yeah.
So he's just like, no, you can't. But I would imagine I might find myself on another train platform at another turnstile at some point in the future.
That's fascinating.
Hmm.
So yeah, you seem busy. Please, guys, check out her podcast. It's Crystal Compton. Thank you for taking the time out to do this tonight.
Absolutely. It was fun.
Yeah, it was fun, fascinating conversation. Maybe we can get in touch again sometime
Sure.
and hook up.
Anytime.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Awesome.
Okay.
Well, take care of yourself, and I'll be tuning into some of your episodes.
Awesome. Thank you so very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.